"Can I clean your mansion for a plate of food?" But when the CEO millionaire saw her, he froze. The night in Boston was brutal. Sheets of rain lashed against the tall iron gates of an old mansion, its lights barely glowing through the storm. The streets were empty, except for a young mother, drenched to the bone, clutching a shivering little girl tightly to her chest. Her name was Isabella. Her clothes were soaked, her shoes worn thin, but she kept whispering softly to her daughter, trying to calm the frightened child. The little girl, Rosie, buried her face into her mother's shoulder, her small arms trembling from the cold. With desperation trembling in her voice, Isabella raised a hand and knocked on the heavy gates. Her knuckles stung against the iron, but she didn't stop. She whispered through the rain, her voice breaking. "Please, anyone. I can clean. I can scrub floors. I just need food for my child." At first, there was only silence, just the roar of thunder. But then, from behind the gates, a figure appeared. Tall, composed, yet strangely shaken by what he saw. It was Alexander Thorne, the reclusive CEO millionaire known for his coldness and solitude. But as his eyes fell on Isabella, he froze. Not because of her words, but because of the simple silver bracelet glinting faintly on her wrist. That bracelet, he had seen it before, years ago, on someone he once loved and lost. And in that storm, for the first time in years, Alexander's guarded world cracked. Alexander stood motionless, the storm soaking his tailored coat as if he didn't notice. His gaze was locked on Isabella's wrist, where the silver bracelet shimmered faintly in the lightning. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a memory. Years ago, he had given that exact bracelet to the only woman who had ever touched his heart, his first love, a woman who vanished from his life without explanation. Seeing it now on this stranger's wrist was like seeing a ghost. Isabella, unaware of the storm inside him, pressed her trembling daughter closer. Her voice cracked as she tried again. "Please, sir, I'll do anything. Just some bread. She hasn't eaten since yesterday." Rosie lifted her face then, her wide, innocent eyes meeting his. And for a man who lived in a mansion of stone and silence, the sight of that fragile child pierced deeper than he expected. Alexander swallowed hard, his voice low, almost broken. Where did you get that bracelet?" Isabella looked down at it, surprised by his sudden question. She hesitated before answering, her voice soft. It belonged to my sister. She gave it to me before she disappeared." The words hit Alexander like a thunderclap, louder than the storm. His chest tightened, his mind racing. Could it be? For the first time in years, Alexander Thorne felt the ground beneath him shift, and he knew this night was only the beginning. For a long moment, Alexander didn't speak. The rain poured harder, drenching the cobblestones, soaking Isabella's worn coat until it clung to her trembling frame. Little Rosie shivered in her arms, her small lips turning pale from the cold. Something inside Alexander, something buried under years of walls and iron discipline, snapped. Without another word, he pressed a code into the gate panel. With a groan, the enormous wrought iron gates swung open. Isabella gasped as the light from the mansion spilled into the storm, golden and warm compared to the freezing night outside. "Come in," Alexander said at last, his voice low, controlled but not unkind. Isabella's breath caught. She clutched Rosie tighter, uncertain if she had heard him right. No one ever opened doors for her. No one ever invited her in. "Sir, Inside, he interrupted, his tone firm but gentler than his usual command. His eyes flicked to the child, who whimpered softly. "She won't last long in this cold." Isabella's knees nearly gave way. She staggered forward, past the gates, into the sprawling driveway lined with hedges that gleamed wet under the storm. The mansion loomed ahead, every window glowing like a beacon of another world, a world she didn't belong to. As they reached the front steps, Alexander removed his own coat and, in a gesture that shocked even himself, draped it over Rosie. The little girl blinked up at him, her teeth chattering, then whispered, "Thank you." Something about those two small words burned straight into his chest. Inside, the grand foyer glittered with marble floors and chandeliers, but Isabella could only focus on the warmth. Heat from the fireplace reached her skin, and for the first time that night, her daughter's shaking slowed. Isabella sank onto her knees, clutching Rosie close, tears slipping down her face. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Alexander stood over them, his expression unreadable, though his hands clenched at his sides, as if holding back emotions he couldn't yet name. "You can start," he said slowly, his eyes again drifting to the bracelet, "by telling me everything you know about your sister." The fire crackled softly in the grand living room, shadows dancing across the high walls. Isabella sat on the edge of an armchair, her damp clothes clinging to her, while Rosie dozed under a thick blanket Alexander's housekeeper had hurriedly provided. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm raging beyond the glass windows. Alexander stood by the mantel, his sharp features set in stone, but his eyes never left that delicate bracelet circling Isabella's wrist. Finally, he spoke. "That bracelet, where did you get it?" Isabella's hand instinctively covered it, her brows furrowing. "It belonged to my sister," she said softly. "It's all I have left of her." Alexander's throat tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to ask, "Your sister, what was her name?" Isabella lowered her eyes, as if speaking it aloud would reopen an old wound. "Her name was Elena." Alexander stiffened. His fingers curled around the mantel's edge until his knuckles turned white. Elena. The name echoed through him like a ghost, dragging memories he had spent years locking away. "She was everything I wasn't," Isabella continued, her voice trembling. "Brave, beautiful, full of dreams. But life was never kind to us. She worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and one day, she never came home." Isabella blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "They told me she had an accident, but no one ever explained how or why. All I know is, she's gone, and this bracelet, this is the only piece of her I could keep." Alexander's mask cracked. A shadow of pain flickered across his face before he quickly turned away, staring into the fire. He remembered Elena. He remembered her laughter, her spirit, her voice that used to challenge him in ways no one else dared. And he remembered the night everything went wrong. Inside, his chest burned with questions he had buried for too long. How much did Isabella know? Did she know the truth that Elena's death wasn't just an accident? Isabella's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. "I swore to her, even if she's gone, I'd protect Rosie. I'd give her a life Elena would have wanted for her niece, even if it means begging at strangers' gates." At that, Alexander turned back, his dark eyes locked on Isabella with a storm of emotions he could no longer hide, because deep down, he knew something she didn't, something that connected Elena, Isabella, and himself. The firelight flickered against Alexander's face, carving sharp lines into his expression. To Isabella, he looked like a man trapped between shadows and flames, like someone fighting a war no one else could see. He poured himself a drink, though his hand trembled as he lifted the glass. The whiskey burned his throat, but it didn't numb the ache in his chest. Not tonight. Not with Elena's name spoken aloud, after all these years. "She was my sister," Isabella whispered again, almost to herself, stroking Rosie's hair as the little girl slept soundly. "I always thought if I had been stronger, smarter, maybe she'd still be here." Her words cut through him. Alexander closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. He wanted to say something, anything, but his tongue felt like lead. Because the truth was a knife buried deep in his chest. He had known Elena. He had cared for her in ways he had never admitted to anyone. But the night she died, he had been there. And though he hadn't caused it, he had failed her. He could have saved her. He could have stopped it. But he hadn't. The guilt clawed at him now, raw and merciless. "Your sister," he said hoarsely, staring into the glass in his hand, "was remarkable." His voice cracked on the word. "The world didn't deserve her." Isabella lifted her head, eyes wide. "You knew her?" Alexander froze. For the first time in years, his carefully built walls trembled. He forced a tight breath. "I crossed paths with her." "Crossed paths?" Isabella frowned, suspicion knitting her brow. "What do you mean? How do you know Elena?" His chest constricted. He couldn't tell her, not yet, not when the truth could shatter everything. He turned sharply toward the fire, hiding his face. "It's complicated." Isabella studied him, confusion etched in her features. "Complicated? Mr. Thorne, my sister died, and no one ever explained why. You look at me as if you know more than you're saying. Please, if you know anything about Elena, I deserve to hear it." Alexander's grip on the glass tightened until it nearly cracked. The storm outside rattled the windows, echoing the storm inside him. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to unburden the weight he had carried in silence for so long. But how could he? How could he look into Elena's sister's eyes and confess that her beloved sister's death was tied to him? That his choices, his neglect, his silence had helped seal her fate? So he said nothing. Instead, he turned toward Isabella with a mask of cold control, even as guilt gnawed at him from the inside. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "You've been through enough. Rest." But when Isabella lowered her gaze and pulled Rosie closer, Alexander felt the words lodge in his throat like shards of glass, because the truth was no longer content to stay buried. It was clawing its way back to the surface, and soon it would destroy them both. The storm outside had calmed by morning, but inside the mansion the air felt heavier than ever. Sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes and the untouched grandeur of Alexander's world. Isabella sat at the long dining table with Rosie, trying to coax her into eating. But her eyes kept drifting to the man at the far end, Alexander Thorne, silent, his gaze fixed on the black coffee in front of him. She replayed their conversation from the night before, the way his voice had broken when he spoke of Elena, the hesitation, the look in his eyes that wasn't just grief, it was something deeper, something he wasn't telling her. "Mr. Thorne," she began carefully, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "About what you said last night, how exactly did you know my sister?" The clink of his spoon against porcelain stopped. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without looking up, he said flatly, "I told you, it's complicated." Complicated? Isabella's hands tightened around Rosie's bowl. That's not an answer. Finally, Alexander lifted his eyes to hers. There was something unreadable in them. Pain, yes, but also warning. Some truths don't do anyone good, Isabella. Let it rest. Her breath caught. The way he said her name, it wasn't harsh, but it carried finality, as if he was trying to shut a door she wasn't meant to open. But Isabella wasn't a woman who turned away from locked doors, not when it came to Elena. "You don't understand," she whispered fiercely. "My sister's death left a hole in me I can't fill. If you know something, anything, I deserve to know it. Rosie deserves to know it." For the first time, Alexander's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his hand flexing against the table. "And if what I tell you ruins the picture you hold of her, if it ruins me—" Her chest tightened. His words confirmed what she had already begun to fear. He wasn't just hiding grief, he was hiding guilt. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rosie's soft laughter as she played with a spoon was the only sound that kept the room from breaking completely. Isabella's gaze lingered on Alexander, her voice low, trembling but firm. "Secrets don't stay buried forever, Mr. Thorne, and when they come out, they destroy everything." Alexander stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid, his back like a wall she could not break through. "I know," he said quietly, almost to himself, and then he left the room. Isabella sat frozen, the truth slipping like shadows through her fingers. The more she searched his eyes, the more she realized Alexander wasn't just connected to Elena. He was hiding something that could change everything she thought she knew. And for the first time, Isabella wasn't sure if she could trust him. The house had grown too quiet. Even Rosie's laughter, that usually filled the halls, couldn't mask the weight pressing down on Isabella's chest. For days, Alexander had kept his distance, retreating into his study, his phone calls, his silences. But Isabella was done waiting, done circling around the shadow of her sister's memory. That evening, she found him in the library. The fire burned low in the hearth, shadows playing across his face as he sat with a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at nothing. "Mr. Thorne," Isabella said firmly, her voice carrying the tremor of both fear and determination. He didn't turn. "Isabella, not tonight." "No," she snapped, stepping closer. Her fists clenched at her sides. "I'm not a child, and I'm not afraid of the truth. I need to know what really happened with Elena." At the sound of her sister's name, his shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. Still, he said nothing. Isabella moved closer, her eyes burning. "Every time I look at you, I see it. The way you flinch when she's mentioned. The way you stop yourself from saying too much. You're hiding something, Alexander, and I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't keep living under this roof, caring for her child, while wondering if you're the reason she's gone." That broke him. His glass shattered against the fireplace as he hurled it with sudden violence, shards scattering across the rug. He rose to his feet, his voice rough, trembling with anger and pain. "You think I don't ask myself that every single day?" His words thundered in the room. "You think I don't see her face every time I close my eyes?" Isabella froze, breath caught in her throat. The mask he had worn so carefully was gone. What stood before her was a man gutted by grief, stripped raw. "I loved her, Isabella." Alexander's voice broke, his hands shaking. "God help me, I loved Elena more than I should have, and I failed her. I failed her when she needed me most." The admission hit Isabella like a blow. Her knees weakened, her chest hollowed. She had suspected, but hearing it aloud turned suspicion into unbearable truth. "You," her voice faltered, then steadied. "You loved her?" He bowed his head, eyes squeezed shut as if the confession burned. "Yes, and it destroyed us both." The room went silent except for the crackling of the fire. Isabella stood trembling, torn between rage and heartbreak, between wanting to strike him and wanting to understand. The truth had come at last, but instead of bringing peace, it had split the fragile trust between them wide open. The silence after Alexander's confession was unbearable. The fire cracked in the hearth, but its warmth did nothing to thaw the cold sinking into Isabella's bones. She stared at him, this man she had begun to trust, begun to admire, even begun to feel something for. And yet, the words still rang in her ears. I loved her. Her sister. The sister who had left behind nothing but unanswered questions and a little girl who still called out for her in dreams. Isabella's chest ached. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold in the pieces of her heart that were threatening to scatter. "How could you?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but it carried all the weight of her broken trust. "She was my sister, and you—" Her breath hitched. "You were supposed to protect her, not fall in love with her." Alexander's head bowed, his face carved in anguish. "I never meant for it to happen. It wasn't meant to be." His voice cracked, low and bitter. "But I failed her, Isabella, and I have been paying for it every day since." She shook her head, tears burning hot in her eyes. "And you never thought I deserved to know. You kept me here in this house with Rosie while carrying this secret that changes everything." He stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "I wanted to protect you, to protect Rosie, to protect what little was left of her." Isabella flinched, retreating a step. "Don't you see? That's not protection. That's a prison. For you, for me, for all of us." The words hung in the air like a judgment neither of them could escape. That night, Isabella sat on Rosie's bed long after the child had fallen asleep, brushing strands of golden hair from her soft cheek. The little girl clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, innocent in dreams. Isabella's chest ached all over again. How could she take Rosie away from the only father she had left? Yet how could she stay in a house built on lies, where every corner whispered Elena's ghost and Alexander's hidden love? The clock ticked in the dark, each second pressing her toward a choice she didn't feel ready to make. Stay and live with the shadow of a love that never belonged to her? Or leave and tear Rosie from the only home she had ever known? When Isabella finally closed her eyes, she knew one truth for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn crept slowly across the mansion, pale light spilling into rooms that felt heavier than stone. Alexander hadn't slept. He sat in the library's armchair, staring into the ashes of a fire long gone cold, every word of last night's confrontation replaying in his mind. Upstairs, Isabella was awake too. She had packed Rosie's small bag twice and unpacked it both times, her heart in a war she couldn't win. The little girl still slept peacefully, unaware of the storm unraveling the adults around her. When Isabella finally descended the staircase, Rosie's hand tucked gently in hers, Alexander's breath caught. The sight of them, her, strong but trembling, and Rosie with sleepy eyes clutching her stuffed rabbit, was almost more than he could bear. "Isabella," his voice cracked raw, "don't." She froze on the last step, gripping Rosie's hand tighter. "I can't stay here, Alexander, not like this. Every wall, every hallway, it's haunted with secrets you never told me. I can't live under Elena's shadow, not knowing where I stand in your heart." Rosie blinked up at her aunt, then at her father, confusion clouding her little face. "Are we going somewhere, Aunt Bella?" The innocence in her voice shattered Isabella's resolve. She bent down, holding the child close, whispering, "I don't know yet, sweetheart. I don't know." Alexander rose, his tall frame trembling under the weight of a fear he had carried for years. "If you walk out that door, Isabella, I lose both of you. Don't you see? You're all I have left." His voice broke, stripped bare of pride and defense. "Don't take her away from me. Don't take yourself away from me." Tears blurred Isabella's vision. "Then give me something, Alexander. Something that's ours, not Elena's, not a secret, not a memory. Show me that there is a place for me here, or let me go." The silence that followed was unbearable. Rosie clung to Isabella's dress, wide-eyed, sensing that the world she knew was threatening to split in two. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of his choice. Not the one he had made long ago with Elena, but the one before him now. Stay in his grief, or fight for the living. The silence stretched so long it felt like the mansion itself was holding its breath. Isabella's hand hovered near the door, Rosie pressed against her side, both of them waiting, one for an answer, the other for a home. Alexander's heart hammered in his chest. He had spent years hiding behind walls built of grief, guilt, and silence. But now, standing at the edge of losing them both, he realized those walls weren't protecting him anymore. They were burying him alive. Slowly, he stepped forward, his voice breaking before the first words even formed. "Isabella, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the man you need or the father Rosie deserves. I've been so afraid. Afraid that if I let go of Elena, I'd lose her forever. Afraid that if I let you in, you'd see the worst of me and walk away." Isabella's lips trembled, her grip tightening on Rosie's hand. "But last night, when you said you might leave," his voice cracked, "I realized the only thing I can't survive is losing you. Losing both of you." He dropped to his knees right there on the marble floor, pride stripped away, his eyes glistening with tears. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise the past won't still hurt, but I can promise this. I will choose you, Isabella, every day. Not Elena's ghost, not my guilt. You. And Rosie. Because you two, you're the only future I want." Rosie's little hand slipped free from Isabella's grasp. She toddled over to Alexander, touching his tear-streaked face with her small palm. "Daddy, don't cry." The word, Daddy, hit him like sunlight through storm clouds. He broke completely, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. Isabella's eyes filled, her chest aching with the sight of a man surrendering, not to weakness, but to love. She stepped closer, her voice whispering like a vow. "I don't need perfect, Alexander. I just need the truth. I just need you." And in that moment, on the cold marble floor, with Rosie cradled between them, the mansion no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to dream. A year later, the mansion no longer whispered with silence. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across furniture that had once gathered dust but now bore signs of life. Rosie's crayons scattered across the coffee table, a soft blanket Isabella had stitched draped over the couch. On Christmas morning, the grand hall that once held only shadows was lit with twinkling lights. Rosie tore into wrapping paper, squealing with delight, while Alexander, once a man of silence, laughed with her, his deep voice warming the room more than the fire ever could. Isabella watched them both, her eyes shining, and for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere she didn't want to leave. In late summer, Alexander stood nervously at the gates of Rosie's new school. He held her tiny hand, his usually steady composure cracking as he knelt down to straighten her backpack. "You'll do wonderfully," he said, his voice thick. Rosie hugged him tight, whispering, "I love you, Daddy," before running inside. Isabella slipped her hand into his, steadying him. In that moment, Alexander realized he had never feared anything more than letting go of love again. At night, the mansion glowed with softer lights, no longer cold or forbidding. Rosie curled up in bed as Alexander sat beside her, book in hand. His deep voice carried the story, but Rosie's eyes grew heavier until she drifted to sleep. Isabella leaned against the doorway, her smile quiet but full of gratitude. When he closed the book, Alexander lingered, gazing at the little girl who had cracked his heart open, then at the woman who had given him courage to keep it open. The ghosts still lingered, but they no longer ruled. Elena's memory had become something gentler, woven into his life, not binding it. He had found a way to grieve and still live. As Isabella and Rosie's laughter rose through the halls like music, Alexander knew this mansion was no longer a tomb of sorrow. It was a home, a beginning, and a promise that love, once surrendered to, could heal even the deepest wounds.
We invite you to join Lightstories if this story strikes a chord with you, makes you smile, or stirs up strong emotions in you. Each story is meant to uplift, heal, and remind you of the beauty that comes from human connection. Share this story with someone who believes in kindness and second chances by clicking the subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. Keep your heart open till we cross paths again, because you never know when someone might ask, "Can I join you here?"